Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to our next session in the 12 Minor Prophets. We're now in session 30. We're beginning the book of Nahum. And again, we're using material supplied by Ariel Ministries. Ariel Ministries Exegetical Outline Notes on the Minor Prophets, prepared by Dr. Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum. Now, you can pick up your class notes from the internet. If you go to the Hadavar website, go to the class and then find the link to the Nahum class notes PDF. You can download the class notes, and you can also download a few handouts that I have given out to previous classes. So again, available on the Hadavar website, the Nahum handouts PDF. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the book of Nahum. Let's begin with the introduction in chapter 1, verse 1. The Oracle of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So we know his name, Nahum. It means full of comfort, or it could be translated, I suppose, consolation or comforter as well. We don't know anything about his family. Nothing is mentioned. No information is given about the date of his ministry either. No king is mentioned. That would make the dating a lot easier, but the dating is difficult because there's no mention of a king. So we have to look to internal clues for help in this area. And we know at the time of the writing, Nineveh was at full strength. This was before she fell in 612. She fell to the Babylonians and the Medians. So this had to be written before 612. But we know also from chapter 3, verse 18, that it's after the fall of No-Ammon. No-Ammon is also known as Thebes in Egypt. That city was destroyed by Ashurbanipal in 665-664 BC. Thebes was rebuilt around 654. So we can reach a conclusion that the date of his ministry was around 663 to 654. 663 to 654 during the reign of Manasseh in Judah. Now, this chart, you can refer to this chart in your handouts. This is our good old chart of the prophetic period. The writing prophets writing somewhere between 845 and 424 BC. We've already looked at a number of the earlier writing prophets: Obadiah, Joel, Amos, Jonah, and Hosea. Now we're in about the middle of the period: Micah, Nahum. There's our friend, Habakkuk, Zephaniah. And then toward the end of the period, Haggai, Zechariah, with the last prophet being Malachi. So there is our prophetic period, and Nahum right about in the middle of it. All right, he's an Elkoshite. He's from Elkosh. That's his home. Now, where is Elkosh located? Well, we really don't know. There are three possibilities, however. One is Elkush in Assyria, but that is not very likely. Another possibility is Capernaum, or Capharnaum, the village of Nahum in the Galilee. However, that does not correspond to Hebrew, in the Hebrew, to Elkosh. And Nahum was a very common name, by the way. And by the way, Capernaum is in the northern kingdom, and that had already been destroyed by the Assyrians. So it's not very likely that it's Capernaum. Let's take a look in Judah then. Galilee's been destroyed. We look in Judah and we have a town called El-Kasi, near Bet Guvrim in the Shvelah. And this is the same area that Micah was ministering in. And so this is really our best choice. Here is a map of the divided kingdom, focusing more on Judah. And El-Kasi is located approximately this location right here. It's in the Shvelah. Now remember, the Shvelah is located between the Philistine plain. The coast is the flat Philistine plain, leading with the beach and on the coastland there. It's between the Philistine plain on the west and the Judean hills on the east. Right in between is the gently rolling hills of the Shvelah. This is the foothills of the Judean mountains. So the Shvelah, the foothills, the rolling hills. And El-Kasi would be located in that approximate area. And then here's a picture of the Shvelah today. Again, a very beautiful area of Israel, gently rolling hills leading up to the Judean mountains, the Shvelah. So El-Kasi is our best choice because Israel had already fallen. The northern kingdom had already fallen in 722, so we really are forced to look in Judah. And only Judah is mentioned in chapter 1, verse 15. So we really must look in Judah for this hometown of Nahum, probably El-Kasi. Well, what was the historical setting? Especially the historical setting of Nineveh. Let's take a look at the background of Nineveh. Well, Nineveh was a city founded by Nimrod way back in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 12. Here's those verses. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like a Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. There's a little bit of a popular saying that came out of his name and his activities. Verse 10, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. That's to the south. From that land he went forth into Assyria. That means he traveled north along the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. He went north into Assyria and built Nineveh and Rehoboth-ir and Calah and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. So here we have a map. Jerusalem and Israel are here in the west on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but sitting in the middle of the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley area, actually just north of the Tigris-Euphrates River, is the capital of the Assyrian Empire, Nineveh. Nineveh is on the Tigris River, but it's on the north side of the Tigris River. So I guess that's a minor detail. Here is a map of Nineveh. And we'll refer to this map in just a second here. So Nineveh was founded by Nimrod, and the first contact of Assyria with Judah was under Shalmaneser III, 859 to 824 BC. Shalmaneser destroyed Israel, and he devastated Judah. He didn't destroy Judah, but he devastated Judah. Then Sennacherib, who came after Shalmaneser, made Nineveh the capital of Assyria, and he built it up into a complex of 4 cities. Now we go back to our wall again, and here's that map of Nineveh. The inner wall around Nineveh was 6.2 miles around. That's what we're looking at here. This is the heart of the Assyrian Empire, the capital, the heart of the capital city of Nineveh. It was much larger than this, but this is the inner wall. There was also an outer wall around Nineveh that was 54 miles around. And so the entire city area was 175 square miles. That's the overall area of the entire city. Now the main walls had a base 50 feet thick, and they rose up to up about 100 feet, and at the top the walls were about 12 feet thick. They were so thick that 3 chariots could ride abreast on the wall. And the outer wall was fortified by 150 towers, some 200 feet high. So that's quite an imposing wall. 50 feet thick at the base, rising up 100 feet, 12 feet thick at the top, and then additional towers rising another 100 feet all around the wall. And now these maps that I've been showing you, this map and the previous, and another map similar to this, are available on pages 2 and 3 of your handouts, just so you can get an idea of the city itself, what archaeology has found. Well, the palace in Nineveh had a great hall that was 40 feet by 150 feet. The armory, which was massive, took 6 years to build up. The main street was 75 feet wide. Now, Nineveh was destroyed in 612 by a combination of 2 armies. First of all, Nabopolassar of Babylon. Now, this guy was the father of Nebuchadnezzar. We're all very familiar with Nebuchadnezzar. He's well known. His father was Nabopolassar, and he allied with Cyaxares of Media. And those 2 armies destroyed Nineveh. Now, Nineveh fell in 2 stages, and both of these stages are referred to in the prophecy that we're about to look at. The first stage happened in 614 BC, and that's mentioned in chapter 1, verse 10, chapter 2, verse 4, chapter 2, verse 15, and chapter 3, verse 11. This is the battle for the outer wall. Actually, it consisted of 3 separate battles from May through August, but the invaders were defeated. And so the Ninevites were rejoicing. They were quite confident in their defenses, and so they were carousing. They were confident the attackers would never enter would never return, but they did return. And so the Ninevites were celebrating with drunken revelry as the Babylonians and Medians returned. And so the invaders get in through the outer wall, and they laid siege to the inner wall. And that's the second stage of the battle, 614 to 612. And that's mentioned in chapter 1, verse 8, chapter 2, verse 6, chapter 2, verse 8, chapter 3, verse 13. This is the battle for the inner wall. And again, this is the inner wall, the key wall right here that we're talking about, the inner wall. How did the inner wall fall? Well, there was unexpected rains in July and August of 612. That's usually the dry season. And so the Kosar River, this is the Kosar River running directly through the main city of Nineveh, the Kosar River, and then the Tigris River to the south and to the west, flooded. Unusual rains. So these two rivers flooded, and 2 miles of the wall were ruined. And that made the needed breach in the wall for the invaders. They came through the wall, and the city was captured. The city was captured. Now, there are a number of sources that tell us about the fall of Nineveh. We won't read those sources. You can refer to them in your notes. A few of the sources are found in the writings of Ctesias, in the writings of Diodorus Siculus in 20 BC. So there's Greek sources to the fall of Nineveh. And if you'll turn your page, a couple of pages, you find another heading, cuneiform sources. Greek, of course, was the language of the West. Cuneiform, they're the language of Assyria. Cuneiform sources describing what happened as well. All right, so let's move on then to the major points of the book of Nahum. I'll leave it up to you to read those additional notes. All right, what are the major points of the book of Nahum? There's 4 major points. First of all, God's rule in the kingdom of men. He raises up and he brings down leaders and kingdoms. For example, Daniel 2, verses 20 and 21. Daniel said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him." Verse 21, "It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise men, knowledge to men of understanding." So our key point here is the kings that are raised up and the kings that are brought down, the leaders of countries brought up, the leaders of countries brought down, are all under the control of God. And this is also what Paul says in Romans 13:1. He says, "Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God." So even though a government may be kind of cruel and immoral, like Rome or other governments, still, God establishes them for his purposes. All right, that's the first major point. The second major point is God's vengeance. He brings recompense on those who attack his people. An example of this is found in Isaiah 34:8. Isaiah writes, "For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion." So God will discipline those who attack his people. And this is really the outworking of the Abrahamic covenant. Point 3, in Genesis 12:3, we read the basic principle, "I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." So the basic principle here is the one who curses you I will curse, not said of any other nation in the world except the Jewish people, Israel. So when Assyria tried to curse Israel by destroying her, she now will be cursed in turn, curse for curse in kind, and that's what the book of Nahum is all about, the fall of Nineveh. Finally, we also learn that God is a stronghold in a time of trouble. That's repeated many times in the scripture. For example, Psalm 9:9, "The Lord also will be a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble, a place of refuge for those who trust in him." All right, our next main point is a quotation of Nahum. Nahum 1:15, quoted in Romans 10:15. But before we look at that, I need to point out that the message quoted in Romans 10:15 started long before the Apostle Paul. The message that he's going to quote started in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 52:7, about 700 BC. Isaiah brought this revelation. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation and says to Zion, your God reigns. So how lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. 700 BC. Well, Nahum picks this up 50 years later, around 650 BC, and he quotes it in verse 15. Behold, on the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. And then he goes on to elaborate. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah. Pay your vows. For never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely. So Nahum knew about the revelation of Isaiah. He was familiar with Isaiah. Well, 700 years later, so was Paul in Romans 10:15. In 56 AD, approximately, he writes, how will they preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news of good tidings. So he applies this to the evangelists of the church. So basically, one good point we can learn from all that is that Paul knew his prophets. Paul knew his prophets. He either got this from Isaiah or Nahum, or he read it in both, and then the Holy Spirit brought it to his mind when he was reading Romans chapter 10, when he was writing that the revelation for us. All right, the theme of the book is the doom of Nineveh. Nahum is a little different than most prophets because he is totally concerned with a nation outside of the Jewish kingdom, and that's the nation of Assyria. He's concerned with a specific city within that nation, the city of Nineveh. Many times most prophets are usually concerned with the Jewish people, Israel, and Jerusalem, but this is a little different. Now, the destruction of Nineveh will be a source of comfort to Judah, because Judah has been devastated by Assyria, not destroyed, but devastated. And this destruction, Nineveh's destruction, will be the completion of Jonah's prophecy. Remember, this is what Jonah wanted to preach against Nineveh. This is what Jonah wanted to see. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Well, it wasn't time in God's plan during Jonah's ministry for Assyria and Nineveh to be overthrown. So Jonah had to preach words of judgment, but the Ninevites responded properly. And they turned from their wicked ways for some short years, but now they've turned back. They're ignoring Jonah's prophecy, the almost destruction of Nineveh, and now it's going to actually happen. They've stepped over the line in the sand. So back to verse 1, the burden of Nineveh. The NASB translates the oracle of Nineveh. The actual word there is masa in Hebrew, means a heavy burden, a heavy message. And so the book is also called the book of the vision of Nahum, and he's the only prophet to use that formula in describing his book. All right, with these background thoughts in mind, let's move on to the first major section, the doom of Nineveh, chapter 1, verses 2 through 15. First of all, the destroyer of Nineveh is described in verses 2 through 8. The God of the universe is the destroyer of Nineveh, and he is described in 6 ways. First of all, he's the God of vengeance in verse 2. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries. He reserves wrath for his enemies. So again, that's the basic theme. God will render wrath and vengeance against Nineveh. This vengeance will be on behalf of his people, of Israel. Now, a lot of people have problems with this concept of jealousy and wrath in regard to God. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, the gentle shepherd. But that's only a one-sided view of Jesus and of God. And so there's not only a negative side to jealousy, but there's also a positive and a biblical side to jealousy. Now let's look at what the New Bible Dictionary says on the subject of jealousy. I thought this was well worded, so I thought I'd reproduce it for you. Divine jealousy, like mentioned in 2 Corinthians 11:2, is a consuming, single-minded pursuit of a good end. And there's a few cross-references given there for you. 1 Kings 19:10, Exodus 20 verse 5, 1 Corinthians 12:31. A consuming, single-minded pursuit of a good end. Divine jealousy. Difficulty is sometimes felt with this, due principally to the way in which the negative connotations of the term have come to predominate in common English usage. So we think of jealousy as a very negative character quality, and it can have a negative side. However, Scripture, also witnesses to a positive application of jealousy and finds in this idea a highly relevant term to denote God's holy zeal for the honor of his name and the good of his people who are bound to him in the marriage of the covenant. God is jealous for his wife. He's seeking the good of his wife. Okay? In this sense, the jealousy of God is the essence of his moral character, because it's a single-minded pursuit for the benefit of those he loves. And therefore, it's a major cause of worship and confidence on the part of his people. We can love God and place our faith in him because he is single-mindedly concerned with our welfare. But it's also a ground of fear on the part of his enemies. Because if you're doing dirty to God's people, you're going to be on the wrathful end of jealousy. So this concept of jealousy is very positive in the sense of God, a single-minded pursuit of a good end. So he's the God of vengeance. He will bring justice and recompense when evil is meted out to his people. Secondly, he's the God of patience in verse 3. The Lord is slow to anger. And this is based on Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. Then the Lord passed by in front of him, and that's Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. So God is patient, but his patience has a limit. He draws a line in the sand, and you can go over that line. Now, God has been patient with Nineveh. He warned Nineveh of vengeance and judgment through Jonah. But, as I mentioned earlier, Nineveh has returned to her old ways. She's stepped over the line in the sand. God's patience is exhausted. Judgment will come. So, the destroyer of Nineveh is the God of vengeance, the God of patience. And by the way, that's not paradoxical. It's just that God's patience has a limit. And thirdly, he's the God of power in chapter 1, verse 3 through 5. Last part of the verse, the Lord is great in power. The Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. So God is in charge of the weather. He's in charge of the tornadoes. There's a nice picture of a tornado funnel, isn't it? Come bearing down on you. He's in charge of the tornadoes. He's in charge of the clouds and the storms. That was really, I think, a dramatic picture of storm clouds. They're about to pour down their rain on that farm. So he's in control of the weather, the storms, the clouds, the winds. In verse 4, he's in control of the water supply. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon wither. So he's in charge of the rain and the streams, and he can cause them to become dry or wet. And I thought this was a great picture illustrating that. Here, this is a irrigation ditch, and the water is flowing down it. But you see, prior to this water coming, it's dry and cracked. But that's God. God controls that in the natural realm. He can dry up the streams and the rivers. And then Bashan and Carmel and Lebanon are mentioned. And these are places that were unusually well watered even during drought. But God can cause them to dry up too. And here's a map predominantly of the northern kingdom. Bashan is just to the east of the Sea of Galilee. We call it the Golan Heights today. that's Bashan. And then on the west, Mount Carmel. You can see Mount Carmel, the end of the Mount Carmel mountain range sticking out into the Mediterranean there. And then to the north, Lebanon. So these areas were normally very well watered, even during drought, but God can dry them up as well. He's in control of the water supply. The God of power is also in control of the dry land in verse 5. The mountains quake because of him. The hills dissolve. Indeed, the earth is upheaved by his presence. And there's an example of those upheavals. That's Mount Everest and the Himalayan mountain range, pushed up by the power of God as he manipulates the surface of the earth. That's the highest physical point on earth, like some 29,000 some odd feet. That's up where airliners fly. So there's Mount Everest, pushed up by the Lord. And finally, this is the God of humanity. He has power over humanity in verse 5. He has power over the world and all the inhabitants in it. Every individual in every crowd. God is very familiar with each person. He's familiar with you and me. He deals with each person as an individual entity. Just as this crowd, God knows everybody in this crowd and all the billions of people on the face of the earth he's aware of. So we have a God of power in control of the weather, the water, the dry land, humanity. And then the destroyer of Nineveh is also the God of wrath in verse 6. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire. The rocks are broken up before him. God of vengeance, a God of wrath, but also a God of refuge in verse 7. Here's the contrast. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. So in the midst of wrath, you'll find that this God is a rock of refuge, a rock of safety and shelter, but that safety and shelter is limited to those who seek refuge in him. In him. So our God is multifaceted. He's a symmetrical, he's a balanced person. He's not just one-sided. He dispenses love and justice. He does both. However, he prefers to dispense mercy and love, for example. Ezekiel 33:11. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord God, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. That's meting out his vengeance and his wrath. But rather that the wicked turn from his way and live. See, he wants us to repent. He wants us to come back to him. Turn back from your evil ways. Why then will you die, O house of Israel? Here he's pleading with the house of Israel to come back to him. And he pleads with men and women all over the world. Don't turn away from me. Come back to me. I take no pleasure in judging you. I want to bless you. But many people, just like Nineveh, refuse to turn to God for blessing. And so they must receive his justice. So verse 8, this is also the God who destroys Nineveh. The God, review this here. The God of vengeance, the God of patience, the God of power, the God of wrath, the God of refuge. He's the one who destroys Nineveh. But with an overwhelming flood, he will make a complete end of its sight and will pursue his enemies into darkness. So the fall of Nineveh is by means of a flood. Now, this verse can be legitimately taken two ways, and interestingly enough, both are true. It can be taken literally, because a flood really did take place. The Tigris and Kosar rivers flooded and destroyed the wall. But it can also be taken in a symbolic sense, because a flood, symbolically in the Bible, is a symbol of military invasion, and that really did take place as well. So the flood took place on a literal and symbolic level at the same time. And so the enemies are pursued into darkness. And Nineveh disappeared to such an extent that it was only rediscovered in 1845 by the archaeologist Layard in Kuyunyik. And I think I pronounced Kuyunyik right there. So here's Nineveh and its environs, and this is the area of Kuyunyik where the excavations took place in 1845. Right in the heart of the city. And here is a book published a few years later in 1852. It was entitled A Popular Account of Discoveries at Nineveh by Austen Layard. And here's one of the illustrations in the book the archaeologists digging down. It looks like at least 10 feet of rubble there, 10 feet of dirt, and finding Nineveh, and now excavating it and bringing some of its stonework to life here. So Nineveh was just almost wiped off the face of the earth. It was covered up by many feet of dirt over the years, over the centuries. So now we come in verses 9 through 14 to the destruction of Nineveh, and Nineveh is specifically addressed in 9 through 11. So Nineveh's plans, Nineveh's device, Nineveh's plans in verse 9 are discussed. Whatever you devise, whatever you plan against the Lord, he makes a complete end of it. Distress will not rise up twice. So Nineveh's evils have been against God, but now Nineveh will become a full end. She'll be totally destroyed, and affliction will not rise up a second time. You see, Nineveh, capital of Assyria, Nineveh brought affliction on Israel. And they brought devastation on Judah. They didn't destroy Judah, but they devastated Judah. So affliction was brought a first time. But Nineveh, unlike other nations and cities, will not rise again. Israel will rise again, Judah will rise again, but Nineveh will not rise again. And again, Nineveh has not been rebuilt to this day. There's no prophecy of Nineveh's rebuilding that exists. And so Nineveh's affliction will not come a second time upon Israel and Judah. Even though Israel and Judah will eventually be destroyed, Israel by the Assyrians, Judah by the Babylonians, they will rise again. But Nineveh will never afflict them again. Instead, Nineveh is destined for destruction in verse 10. Like tangled thorns, like those who are drunken with their drink, they are consumed as stubble, completely withered. And thorns and stubble are easily burned. They're dry, they make good fire. They burn easily. They're easily to make a fire out of them. And so the Ninevites had a false hope of victory because they thought they had defeated the enemy. They were drunken and they were surprised in their revelry. While partying, Babylon was breached. The outer wall was breached, and so they will be destroyed. And there's alliteration there in the Hebrew, ki ad sirim, sivuchim, uvasavam, suvim. I don't know how good a job I did on pronouncing that, but that's an idea. You get that in the Hebrew. So the sin of Sennacherib is discussed in verse 11. From you has gone forth one who plotted evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. So the one gone forth is probably Sennacherib. So he purposed evil against the Lord. He acted in deliberate opposition to God's will. And he also consulted wickedness, or he consulted a wicked counselor. And that man is described as Belial. It describes a man, and the word implies that he's a messenger of Satan. So he thought through evil, he planned evil, he consulted those who were evil, and the result is seen in Isaiah 36 and 37. It's a record of his deliberate opposition to God and his arrogance. We'll look at Isaiah 36, just the verses 14 through 20, just to give you an idea how he deliberately went against God. Thus says the king, and this is a reference to the king of Assyria, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you, nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. Now that was a big mistake to say that. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. The city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. So he's deliberately contradicting the revelation that came through to Hezekiah. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria. Here's the truth, in other words. Make your peace with me and come out to me, and each one eat of his vine and his fig tree, and drink each of the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware that Hezekiah does not mislead you. So he's accusing the revelation Hezekiah got of being a lie, saying, the Lord will deliver us. And now he makes it into a battle of the gods. Has any one of the gods of the nations delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? So now he makes this a battle between the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, and idols. Big mistake. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And when have they delivered Samaria from my hand? In other words, these gods are more powerful than your God. Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their land from my hand? That the Lord would deliver Jerusalem from my hand. In other words, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob is weaker than the gods of Assyria. It's a battle of the gods. Very, very arrogant. And so that will need to be addressed. Now our attention is turned to Judah in verses 12 and 13, and the fall of Nineveh, the fall of Assyria is mentioned to Judah. Thus says the Lord, though they are at full strength and likewise many, even so they will be cut off and pass away. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no longer. Though they are at full strength, that's probably the best rendering of the verse. They have full armor. They have full military supplies. The Hebrew there is shalamim. It means completion, fulfillment, wholeness. And so there's been various renderings. If you've got a different Bible, if you have a King James version, it might say quiet. The Tanakh may render that as full, RSV as strong, the NIV as many allies, the New King James as safe. But again, probably the best rendering is the ASV and NASB, full strength. They're mighty army. They're numerous, they're fully armed. For example, in Isaiah 36:37, we learn how numerous they are. Then the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when men arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead. So these are just the casualties. That's not the whole army. The army was over 185,000 soldiers. And so they were cut down in one night, as we learn in verse 36. But then the king who brought them, he will be destroyed as well. And he was assassinated while idol worshiping. Here's verses 37 and 38. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived in Nineveh. There's our arrogant king. There's the city we're talking about. And it came about as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, killed him with the sword. And they escaped into the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, became king in his place. So Sennacherib is assassinated while idol worshiping. So God says, though I have afflicted thee, speaking of Judah, they've been afflicted by Assyria under Sennacherib, I will afflict thee no more. No more will Assyria attack you. And so Judah will be set free. In verse 13, free from the yoke of the Assyrians. So now I will break his yoke bar from upon you, and I will tear off your shackles. So Assyria's fall will lead to Judah's freedom. Now as we turn to verse 14, Assyria is addressed. Judah had been mentioned in verses 12 and 13. Now God's attention turns to Assyria, and he describes the fall of the Assyrian kingdom. First part of verse 14. The Lord has issued a command concerning you. Your name will no longer be perpetuated. Now the Assyrians were especially concerned that their name be perpetuated. The Assyrians and the king were eager for fame. They were eager to be remembered. They built huge monuments and had sides of cliffs inscribed with messages recording their victories. All of this was to publish their fame for all time. The Assyrian kings were not noted for humility, even when they had to admit some kind of a failure. They did it in such a way as to describe the failure so no one would know about it. And Sennacherib is a prime example. In his own records, he says he defeated 46 cities of Judah. The Bible agrees. He defeated 46 cities. However, although he laid siege to Jerusalem, he could not take the city because his army was wiped out in one night. But he doesn't put that in the record. Here is Sennacherib's prism in the Israel Museum, and here's what's written on the prism. 46 cities in Judah I devastated and took their spoil, but as for Hezekiah, the king, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. Now, the words are truth and lies at the same time. The implication he's trying to give us is that he defeated Hezekiah like a bird in a cage because his armies came against Judah. But of course, he's unable to state that Jerusalem fell like the other 46 cities. So in their inscriptions, the Assyrian kings would always word it so they look good. So Although the Assyrian kings wanted their name perpetuated, God says their name will be perpetuated no more. And so they will fall, and their gods will fall. In verse 14, I will cut off idol and image from the house of your gods. Now, from the Expositor's Bible Commentary, here's some good remarks I thought it'd be good to share with you. The commentary is volume 7 on Daniel and the Minor Prophets, page 468 and 469. The commentator writes, Assyrian kings claimed to rule by the favor and authority of their gods, whom they honored accordingly. Ashurbanipal, in a single cylinder, paid profuse homage to 17 of the principal gods of the Assyrian pantheon. 17. 2 gods received special reverence. Ashur was acknowledged as the great God who begat me, being honored 79 times on this cylinder, and 95 times he referred to Ishtar as the lady, as the mistress, the lady of ladies, the goddess of war, the queen of gods. The judgment of Nineveh's king therefore demanded the destruction of the idolatrous religion on which his authority was founded. See, this is the battle of the gods, and so it was appropriate to crush their idols. And that is seen in our cross references here, Isaiah 36, 18 through 20, which we already discussed. Let's look at, I'm not done with the article here. Yes, because the article continues to describe the homage paid to these idols. So let's back it up here. Nineveh's king, the judgment of Nineveh's king therefore demanded the destruction of the idolatrous religion on which his authority was founded. This was centralized in the temple, which housed the carved images and cast idols, within which its particular deity rested. These idols were normally made of precious wood and plated with gold, or of molten metal, such as gold, and poured into a mold. They would be shaped in human form, even in the likeness of the reigning king, such as Sennacherib. An elaborate ritual was required to endow them with life and sight and purity. Yeah, right. After which they would be clothed in sumptuous garments and placed on a pedestal in the inner sanctuary or cella. In keeping with their human likeness, they would be fed 3 times a day, and their clothes would be changed periodically. There you go. Idol worship at its height. This had to be addressed, and so God addressed it. And the arrogance we see in Isaiah 36, 18 through 20, we already read that. Let's take a look at Isaiah 37, starting with verse 10. Thus you shall say to the king Hezekiah, king of Judah, do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. They're directly contradicting the word of God. Behold, you have heard that the kings of Assyria have done to all these lands, destroying them completely. So will you be spared? Did the gods of these nations which my fathers have destroyed, delivered them? Even Gozan and Haran and Rezeph and the sons of Aden, who were in Telassar, did the gods deliver them? Where is the king of Hamath and the king of Arpad and the king of the city of Sepharvaim and of Hena and Eva? See, none of these nations were delivered by their gods. Why do you think your God will deliver you? So it's a battle of the gods. And so the Assyrians were boasting that their gods were stronger than any other gods. Well, now they've come against the true and living God, and so they are totally destroyed. So the fall of Assyria then is mentioned in the second part of verse 14. I will prepare your grave. You are contemptible. And the emphasis here is permanence. It's not a temporary fall. You are vile and contemptible. And this will bring comfort to Judah in verse 15, first part of the verse. There's our verse. Behold, on the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. And this is a quotation again from Isaiah 52, verse 7. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. So that statement was made 50 years earlier. Now, the context of the two statements is different. Isaiah, in his statement, is revealing the comfort to come from the Messiah. Comfort from the Messiah. Nahum, in his use of the statement, he applies it. He reveals the comfort to come from Nineveh's fall. Okay? So they're revealing comfort. Isaiah, the Messiah's comfort. Nahum, the comfort received from Nineveh's fall. Judah's response is discussed in verse 15. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah. Pay your vows, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely. This is a call to obedience and a call to honor and obey the Mosaic covenant. So keep the feast, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. This is Godward obedience. Keep your vows. That's manward obedience. All the contracts you make with people, manward obedient. And the reason Assyria will no longer pass through, they can't cause any interruptions in God's calendar or against God's people. And the wicked one, the Belial, the messenger of Satan, will not pass through again either, because Assyria is destroyed. Her destruction is total. So now we come to chapter 2, 13 short verses that describe Nineveh's doom. And Nahum describes a savage onslaught by the Babylonians and the Medians. So there's a description of the invasion in verses 1 through 7. First of all, the approach of the invaders in verse 1. The one who scatters you has come up against you. Man the fortress, watch the road, strengthen your back, summon all your strength. So the one who's going to scatter, as the NASB records it, has approached the city. This is the Babylonians and the Medes, and some accounts include the Scythians. There might have been Scythian army, a Scythian present as well, but basically the Babylonians and the Medes. And so there's alliteration in this call. Natzor Metzurah. How do you render that idea into English? Something like, fence thy defenses. In other words, the idea here is, Nineveh, brace yourself, get ready for this attack. So the approach, however, marks God's vengeance on behalf of Israel in verse 2. For the Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel, even though devastators have devastated and destroyed their vine branches. So Israel's excellency will be restored. You know, the northern kingdom was destroyed, the southern kingdom devastated, but the northern kingdom will be back. Not Assyria. Assyria will not be back. Then in verse 3, the armor, the soldiers of the invaders are described in verse 3. The shields of his mighty men are colored red. The warriors are dressed in scarlet. The chariots are enveloped in flashing steel when he is prepared to march, and the cypress spears are brandished. So this army is impressive and awe-inspiring. It's an awe-inspiring military machine. And in those days, red was a favorite military color. Today it's camouflage, but then it was red. So the shields are colored red. The soldiers are dressed in scarlet. The chariots of iron, the spears of hard cypress wood. An impressive military machine. The battle starts in the suburbs in verse 4. The chariots race madly in the streets. They rush wildly in the squares. Their appearance is like torches. They dash to and fro like lightning flashes. So the fighting in the outer streets is won, and the victory is achieved with great speed. Then they arrive at the wall, the inner wall. He remembers his nobles. They stumble in their march. They hurry to her wall, and the mantlet is set up. Now we have two positions you should be aware of regarding this verse. What are the two positions? Well, the first position is that this is a reference to the attackers. They arrive at the city wall so quick that they're stumbling over one another. They're running so quickly. And then the mantlet is set up. They believe this could be the siege engines with its protective covering. Now here's an ancient battering ram, the siege engine set up, and this protective covering here, covering up the soldiers, manning the battering ram. Maybe that's the mantelet. They think that's the mantelet. So in this position, it's an offensive shield. An offensive shield. The alternate understanding is that this is a reference to the defenders stumbling in their drunkenness to the wall to defend the city. And the mantelet there would be a protective defensive shield. So either a protective offensive shield or a defensive shield, whichever position you feel is best. But the warfare for the inner wall is on. And then the destruction of Nineveh will come by water. Verse 6, the gates of the rivers are opened. Now, commentators supply 5 options regarding how this water destroyed Nineveh, but the most likely option is the Kosar River flooding along with the Tigris. And again, remember the river Kosar was connected to the Tigris by a canal. Here is the walls of Nineveh, the inner walls of Nineveh that the invaders have reached. Now to the south and west, in the bottom left corner, is the Tigris River, and then the Kosar River running through the middle of the city right here. So both of these rivers overflowed, and that destroyed 2 miles of the wall. Running right through Nineveh, 2 miles of the wall was destroyed, and the breach had been made. And so the palace is dissolved in verse 6. The palace is dissolved. Now, the better rendering would be melts. Melts. The word really means melts there. Now, it's thought by some that Sardanapalus was the emperor. And if that's true, the palace was not dissolved by water, which is not what we think, but by fire. That's why melt would be a better term there. The palace was dissolved by fire. So what happened here? The flooding of the river recalled an ancient oracle that said Nineveh would fall when the river becomes its enemy. Instead of protecting the city, the river destroyed the wall. So the river became its enemy, not its friend. And Sardanapalus, when he saw that defeat was on hand, he made a huge funeral pyre in his palace, and he burned himself and all his concubines and everything with it. Everything went up in smoke. It all melted. So the palace is melted. Now in verse 7, we read, I forgot to show you these pictures of Sardanapalus. This is a relief of Sardanapalus in the Brooklyn Museum. There's a drawing of it. And this is a statue that a modern artist made of Sardanapalus. Oh, he's probably the king that was destroyed. In verse 7, we learn that the queen is captured. It is fixed. It is decreed, is the idea there. She is stripped, she is carried away, and her handmaidens are moaning like the sound of doves beating on their breasts. So that's probably the best rendering. It is decreed. Some people feel this should be a proper noun, hutsav. Hutsav is uncovered. Okay, some feel this is a proper noun describing the queen. Hutsav being the queen, perhaps standing in for the goddess Ishtar. It could be Nineveh personified as a woman, and she's stripped as a sign of being conquered. She goes into a captivity, Assyria going into captivity. Her handmaids are going to mourning. So if this is not a reference to a particular queen, then it would be a reference to the inhabitants of the city being carried away into captivity. Anyway, it's a poetic description of the destruction of Nineveh. And then the destruction is mentioned also in verses 8 through 13. First of all, the retreat, the flight of Nineveh's soldiers in verse 8. Though Nineveh was like a pool of water throughout her days, now she is fleeing. Stop, stop. But no one turns back. So it's a word picture here of water flowing out of a tank. It pictures the frenzied flight of the soldiers. None of them looks back. None of them stops. They are getting out of there. And then the taking of the spoil is mentioned in verse 9. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold, for there's no limit to the treasure. Wealth from every kind of desirable object. So vast amounts of gold and silver had been acquired by the Assyrians. It was the richest city in the ancient Near East at that time. And the city is sacked in verse 10. She is emptied, yes, she is desolate and waste. Hearts are melting, knees knocking. Also anguish is in the body, and their faces have grown pale. Faces have grown pale. And again, there's alliteration in the Hebrew here. Buka, umevuka, umechulaka. Now, attempts to render the Hebrew into English might be best described by examples 1 and 4 in your notes. Number 1, sack, sacking, ransacking. Number 4, dissolved, desolated, drained. So that's the idea in the Hebrew there. Alliteration describing the sacking of the city. And the inhabitants are terrified, terror-stricken. So the lion of Assyria is felled forever in verses 11 through 13. And Assyria prided herself in being as savage as a lion, a savage beast of prey. So the lion was the symbol of Assyria, but the lion will be no more. Where's the den of lions and the feeding place of the young lions? Where's the lioness and the lion's cub prowled? with nothing to disturb them. So once the lion destroyed others, now in verse 12, the lion tore enough of his cubs, killed enough for his lionesses, and filled his lairs with prey and his dens with torn flesh. So the lion destroyed others and provided for themselves, for the Assyrians, provided riches for themselves, but now God is going to destroy the lion in verse 13. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts. I will burn up her chariots in smoke. A sword will devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the land, and no longer will the voice of your messengers be heard. So the lion once destroyed others, God will now destroy the lion. And here's some very excellent comments from the Bible Knowledge Commentary on verses 11 and 12. Nahum responded to the envisioned destruction of the city with a taunt. Where now is the lion's den? His rhetorical question implied that the capital no longer existed. The symbolism of the lion's den is uniquely appropriate. Like a lion hunting for his lioness and cubs, Assyria had plundered other nations. Assyrian kings prided themselves in their ability to kill lions and lion hunts. Here's a picture, a relief of Ashurbanipal fighting a lion, a very stylized relief. Of course, he's holding that lion off at his throat and impaling him with his sword. Or it's kind of a romantic view of fighting a lion, isn't it? And the kings liken their own ferocity and fearlessness to that of lions. For example, Sennacherib boasted of his military fury by saying, "Like a lion I raged." Lions were frequently pictured in Assyrian reliefs and decorations. No wonder Nahum likened Nineveh to a lion's den. But now the lairs would be emptied. No longer would there be lions, cubs, and ripped carcasses. So God says that the Assyria's messengers will not be heard. So Assyria's messengers will not be sent out to demand submission and to exact tribute or to blaspheme God. And again, we see examples of this. And a good example is 2 Kings 19:8 through 13. Here's the messenger, the Rabshakeh. He's the messenger of the king of Assyria. Then the Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah, for he had heard that the king had left Lachish. When he heard them say concerning Tirhakah, king of Cush, "Behold, he has come up to fight against you," he sent messengers again to Hezekiah. So now Hezekiah is receiving some Assyrian messengers from the Rabshakeh. "Thus you shall say to Hezekiah, king of Judah, do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you." That's the messenger, the message of the messengers from Assyria. Don't trust your God. Jerusalem will not be given. Let me read that again. "Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria." Don't trust that message. And then his arrogance shows up. "Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, destroying them completely. So will you be spared? Did the gods," there he turns into a battle of the gods again, big mistake. "Did the gods of those nations which my fathers destroyed deliver them, even Gozan and Haran and Rezeph and the sons of Aden who were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath and the king of Arpad and the king of the city of Sepharvaim and Hena and Eva?" So they were arrogant. They demanded submission. They exacted tribute from the countries they conquered. They blasphemed their gods. And in this case, they're blaspheming the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who loves his people and will bring vengeance upon his people. And so they're cursing the Jewish people. They will be cursed in kind. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 2, and we're ready to begin chapter 3 in our next session, dealing with the reasons for Nineveh's doom. So I'd be very happy to have you join us for our next sessions. Thanks so much for being with us on the beginning of this book of Nahum. Shalom.